So let's talk about one of the most incredible and honestly radical experiments in all of American history. It was a federal agency born right out of the ashes of the Civil War. And it wasn't just about managing the transition from slavery to freedom. No, this was really the first big fight over a question we are still wrestling with today. What is the government's role in making sure people not only have liberty, but also have justice?
To really get what's at stake here, I want you to hear the story of a teenager named Alfred Jefferson. In 1866, he was accused of riding his employer's horse without asking, and his employer's reaction, which you see here in the sworn statement, was just horrifying. He tied Alfred's hands and feet to an oak tree and whipped him with a handsaw.
Now, you have to understand the timing here. If this had happened just 2 years before, Alfred, as an enslaved person, would have been considered property. He would have been completely at the mercy of his master's will, with absolutely zero access to the law.
What was so different in 1866 that gave this young man, for the very first time in his life, a shot, any shot at all, to have his voice heard and get some kind of justice?
Well, the answer was this totally groundbreaking new federal agency. It was called the Freedmen's Bureau, and it was given one of the most massive challenges a nation has ever faced: help almost 4 million people navigate the path from being property to being citizens.
And I'm not using that word radical lightly here. This really was a massive, unprecedented experiment. Its mission was to step into nearly every single aspect of life in the defeated South. I mean, just look at this list. The sheer scope of what they were supposed to do was just staggering. As the historian Eric Foner said, a single agent for the Bureau had to be a diplomat, marriage counselor, educator, supervisor of labor contracts, sheriff, judge, and jury, all rolled into one. They were literally on the front lines, trying to build a new world.
And you know, for a short time, a really short time, it actually worked. It had these incredible successes. It's what the great scholar W.E.B. Du Bois famously called a brief moment in the sun.
This was absolutely revolutionary. I mean, you can't overstate it. The Bureau set up its own courts where freed people, people like Alfred Jefferson, could finally testify against white people. This completely upended centuries of a legal system that had made them invisible.
But it wasn't just about the law. The Bureau's work got incredibly personal. It took on the huge task of helping to put the Black family back together, an institution that slavery had systematically tried to destroy. And one way they did this was by legalizing thousands of marriages. Just look at this certificate for Isaac and Catherine Kelly. It's a powerful piece of paper, but that little note at the bottom, that tells an incredible story of love, of being torn apart by force, and of a reunion finally recognized by the law.
And what about education? Well, that was seen as the key to real freedom. The Bureau helped set up, get this, over 4,000 schools for freed people. This laid the foundation for public education in the South and even helped start legendary institutions like Howard University. But like we said, this moment in the sun, it was tragically brief. The promise of the Bureau was met with just ferocious political opposition and a massive wave of violence. And its most important goal? Well, that was killed from the very top.
At the end of the day, for most freed people, real freedom meant one thing: land, economic independence. As this freedman Bailey Wyatt argued so powerfully, they felt they had earned a right to the land their stolen labor had made rich for centuries. This was the hope behind that famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule.
So here's the heartbreaking reality. On one hand, you had Congress and military leaders like General Sherman making these initial promises of land. But on the other hand, you had President Andrew Johnson, who actively worked against them. He handed out thousands of pardons to former Confederates, which gave them their old land back. He basically killed the dream of Black land ownership before it even had a chance to start.
And this shows you what that backlash looked like on the ground. It's a pretty clear cause and effect. In places where the Bureau was active, Black political power started to rise. The Democratic vote share actually dropped by 5 points. So what was the response? Those exact same places saw a huge surge in racial violence, as white Southerners used terror to stamp out those political gains.
So why? Why did this amazing experiment, which was filled with so much potential, ultimately fall so short of its goals?
Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was like a perfect storm of opposition coming from all sides. You had a president, Andrew Johnson, who fought it every step of the way. You had a Congress that was too divided to fully back it. You had widespread racism, not just in the South but in the North too, that eroded public support. And of course, you had constant violent resistance on the ground in the South.
And if you want to know how deep that opposition went, it went all the way to the White House. This is a direct quote from President Johnson's official message to Congress. It's pretty shocking to read, and it tells you everything you need to know about the deep-seated prejudice that was shaping his policies and dooming the Bureau's work.
You see, the failure to give freed people that economic foundation, especially land, that wasn't just a political loss back then. It created profound, lasting consequences that we are still living with today.
Without land, without any property to build wealth or to pass down to your children, what happens? Generations get trapped in poverty and systems like sharecropping. And that failure contributes directly to the staggering racial wealth gap that still exists today. I mean, just look at these numbers from 2019. It's stark.
And that brings us full circle right back to that beautiful, heartbreaking quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, the Freedmen's Bureau. That was the brief, brilliant moment in the sun. It was a glimpse of what a different America, one truly committed to justice and economic rights for all, could have looked like.
So the end of the Bureau wasn't just an agency shutting down. It was a promise being broken, a promise of justice for people like Alfred Jefferson, and a promise of economic freedom for millions. And that turning point shaped the next 150 years of inequality in America, leaving us with one of the biggest and most important what-ifs in our nation's history.